think I know most of you, but my name is Penny Wright, and we're happy to have each of you here with us. And I know many of you, if not most, have come to several of Fred's talks, of Fred's many talks here at the library, which now I've forgotten the number, but it's upwards of 20, I believe. And I'm not being corrected, so.
30.
Anyway, Fred Volkmer began writing for the Southampton Press in 1983. He's written book, art, theater, and music reviews. In addition, his work has appeared in Newsday, the East Hampton Star, the New York Sun, the Christian Science Monitor, and the Wall Street Journal. His work has been praised by William F. Buckley, who said that he is a reviewer to watch, and by Sidney Offutt, the curator of the James Pope Journalism Awards. Barbara Wurzba, the novelist and writer of children's books, who had been a longtime reviewer for the New York Times Book Review, said of him that he was one of the best reviewers writing today, and we agree. Roger Rosenblatt and Louis Begley have praised his acuity and sensitivity. The novelist Frederick Teuton thanked Fred for one of his reviews with these words: "I can't thank you enough for your thoughtful, beautifully written, and insightful review of The Green Hour. It touched me very much and made me feel, how shall I say, understood and thus less lonely." Fred is a member of the National Book Critics Circle. He is also a singer who sings with the Choral Society of the Hamptons. We are very lucky to have Fred in this community. Please welcome Fred Volkmer.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you all for coming. I just want to thank the library for having me here. In 1954, the drama critic Kenneth Tynan, who was not given to lavish praise, called Rebecca West the greatest journalist alive. Not the greatest woman journalist, though she's been called that too, but the greatest journalist, period. And not only was she a journalist, but also a novelist, historian, literary critic, biographer, and travel writer. The range of her oeuvre is so vast and her posture is so Olympian that it is impossible to classify her. She gave an early hint of her perspective when, as a small child, she was found burying chestnuts in a family garden and then digging them up again. When asked what she was doing, she explained, "I am God, and they are my people. I made them die, and now I'm resurrecting them." When she was asked why she had buried them if she was only going to dig them up again, she replied, "Well, that would have been all right for them, but it wouldn't have been any fun for me." She was born Cicely Isabel Fairfield. The name almost reeks of English propriety and ruffles and corsets and lavender-scented talcum. But there was nothing quite proper about her. She was born in London in 1893 of Scotch-Irish parents and was educated in Edinburgh, later training as an actress at the Academy of Dramatic Art. She briefly pursued an acting career and played the part of Rebecca West in Henrik Ibsen's play Rosmersholm. She adopted the name of that passionate and fierce woman as her pen name when she began writing for the suffragist weekly, The Free Woman, no doubt thinking that no one would ever pay any attention to someone named Cicely Fairfield. The Rebecca West of the play forces her married lover into a melodramatic double suicide by drowning. The desperation suggested by her namesake reveals something about the peril associated with being a feminist in the early years of the last century. She wrote at the time, "I myself have never been able to find out what feminism is. I only know that people call me a feminist whenever I express sentiments that differentiate me from a doormat or a prostitute. Rebecca West became a Fabian socialist and met George Bernard Shaw and H.G. Wells. She first encountered Wells in print when she reviewed his book, Marriage. She said of him, of course, he is the old maid among novelists. Even the sex obsession that lay clotted on Anne Veronica and the new Machiavelli like cold white sauce was merely old maid's mania, the reaction towards the flesh of the mind too long absorbed in airships and colloids. It was almost inevitable that she and the married Wells would become lovers. The writer Fay Weldon said of this that it was the encounter of giants. Godzilla meets King Kong in the writing world long ago. In a correspondence filled with mutual baby talk, West and Wells referred to each other as Jaguar, that's Wells, and Panther, that's West. These names do suggest the powerful predatory qualities of both these writers. Even in her 80s, she was praised by the literary editor of the Sunday Telegraph for the unmistakable pounce of her reviewing style. Their relationship lasted 10 years and produced a son, Anthony West, whose middle name was Panther, and who proved to be a thorn in his mother's side, though he would say the same of her. She neglected to tell him that she was his mother and that Wells was his father until he was 9, and demanded to know. Until then, he called her Aunt Panther. Anthony was the child that neither parent wanted. He idolized his father, the father of his dreams, though he seldom saw him. He accused his mother of keeping him from Wells, when in fact, Wells, though he could charm his son completely, wanted little to do with him. Anthony blamed his mother for the circumstances of his life, including his illegitimacy. He wrote a biography of his father, the first 100 pages of which could have been subtitled The Case Against Rebecca. The fact that while researching the book he destroyed several of his mother's letters to Wells might seem to indicate that he was not being entirely objective or honest. Anthony wrote a book about growing up with Wells and his mother, a novel called Heritage. It was published in the United States, but Rebecca successfully sued to prevent its publication in England on the grounds of libel. The book was only published in England after Rebecca West's death. During the legal struggle, Rebecca West wrote to a friend, "I have no love for Anthony and no hate. I have only a passionate concern with him, and in no man's land where love and hate do not exist, only vertigo." Anthony nursed his hatred of his mother until he died. He became a fairly successful journalist, reviewing books for the New Yorker, a job that his mother got for him. Rebecca West's love life was something of a scandal. She had affairs with Charlie Chaplin, Max Beaverbrook, the publishing magnate, the Rupert Murdoch of his day, and with John Gunther, author of the famous Inside books, and apparently as a young man, something of a Greek god. In 1930, she married the rather colorless banker, Henry Maxwell Andrews, and settled with him in a country house in Buckinghamshire. Henry was described by Virginia Woolf as such dead, though excellent, mutton. But to be fair to poor Henry, she also found him kind, intelligent, erudite, and clearly devoted to Rebecca. In 1918, Rebecca West published her first novel, The Return of the Soldier. It is about a shell-shocked amnesiac who doesn't remember his high-born wife and who falls in love with the working-class girl who nurses him back to health. The critic Samuel Hines described it as a small masterpiece. Towards the end of The Return of the Soldier, the heroine, our working-class girl, thinks, "There is a draught that we must drink or not be fully human. I knew that one must know the truth. I knew quite well that one is adult. One must raise to one's lips the wine of the truth, heedless that it is not sweet like milk, but draws the mouth with its strength, and celebrate communion with reality, or else walk forever queer and small like a dwarf." although now we'd probably say something vertically challenged. Said Mr. Hines, communion with reality is a large ambition, and one that must lead a woman away from her private world to politics and art and history, to law and religion and crime. It is the course that Dame Rebecca has followed. She wrote this when she was alive, extending and deepening her accounts of reality until few modern writers can match her range or her steady moral seriousness. Rebecca West wrote several remarkable novels, among them the autobiographical The Fountain Overflows, and her last novel, The Birds Fall Down, about the period before the Russian Revolution, a kind of opera as spy novel, in the central part of which an old reactionary and a terrorist engage in a series of dialogues, each defending his worldview. But I think in the end her novels will be secondary to her nonfiction, simply because her nonfiction towers so immensely above the intellectual landscape. She wrote a fascinating biography of St. Augustine, in which she engages seriously with a major thinker. She saw him as an egotist, a self-dramatizer, and a great romantic artist. Excuse me a second. She felt that he was working in the same introspective vein as the modernists, like Proust. He had an extraordinary mind and effectively shaped the modern world into his own image. But like so many influential and magnetic men, he had his rough edges. She wrote to a reader who complained that she didn't paint him in a sympathetic light. If I had told all I know about the old blackguard, he would have been asked to resign from all his clubs. Her case against Augustine and Augustine's God, as Penelope Fitzgerald noted in an essay on West, was that he made sacrifice and suffering a condition of redemption. Pain is the proper price for any good thing. She said of Augustine that he intellectualized with all the force of his genius the idea of atonement through suffering. Her engagement with the mind and life of Augustine affected her worldview and her authorial voice. Samuel Hines remarked that the best term to describe the note of authority in her writing is episcopal. She writes like a 4th century African bishop, praising the righteous, condemning heretics, explaining doctrine, confident always of the rightness of her judgments and of their firm moral bases. She is easy with terms like Manichaean and Pelagian and can use them as metaphors for literary situations. And the language is significant, for in her world, heresies do exist and they matter. St. Augustine, by the way, was a Manichaean for many years before he converted to Christianity. Manichaeism is the belief that the world is dualistic, broken down into either good or evil, white or black. The Pelagians did not accept the doctrine of original sin, a major tenet of Christianity. As Psalm 51 says, I was shapen in iniquity, and in sin did my mother conceive me. Augustine battled the Manichaeans and Pelagians throughout his career. Rebecca West's post-war journalism is collected in The Meaning of Treason, later expanded to The New Meaning of Treason, and A Train of Powder. In these books, she covers some of the major political trials of the 20th century, from the Nuremberg trials to the trials of the English fascists John Amory and William Joyce, also known as Lord Hawmore, and also the Profumo scandal. She also covered 2 particularly brutal murder trials, one in America and one in Great Britain. But her unquestioned masterpiece, so monumental, it casts a shadow over all her other works and any subsequent journalism about the area, is Black Lamb and Grey Falcon. In the spring of 1936, the British Council invited Rebecca West to lecture in Yugoslavia. Thanks to the rise of the Nazis and the ongoing depredations of Stalinism, tensions were rising in the Balkans, as if they had not historically been high enough. West wrote to an official of the Council that the country would inevitably be overrun, either by Germany or under Russian direction by communism, which would destroy its character, blot out its inheritance from Byzantium. Soon she would realize, if she did not already, that inheritance from Byzantium was also a tense and complex thing, since the Byzantium of Christian orthodoxy was also the Istanbul of the Muslim Ottoman Empire. Here was a land whose past, present, and future placed it always at the intersection of immensely powerful states, empires, and faiths. It was a place, West soon learned, of endlessly fascinating complication, and a place that was gravely endangered. Black Lamb and Grey Falcon has been called by the cultural critic Alan Jacobs one of the greatest, if not the greatest book of the 20th century. This nearly 1,200-page opus about pre-war Yugoslavia combines within its covers travelogue, history, theology, and cultural study. In the words of Christopher Hitchens, it is 4 books in one. The first and most notable of these volumes is one of the great travel narratives of our time, which seeks to net and analyze one of the most gorgeous and various of ancient and modern societies. The second volume gives an account of the mentality and philosophy of a superbly intelligent woman whose feminism was above all concerned with the respect for and the preservation of true masculinity. The third volume transports any thoughtful or historically minded reader into the vertiginous period between the 2 world wars, a time when those with intellectual fortitude could face the fact that the next war would be even more terrible than the last, and who did not flinch from that knowledge. The fourth volume is a meditation on the never-ending strife between the secular and the numinous, the faithful and the skeptical, the sacred and the profane. Rebecca West first visited Yugoslavia in 1936 and returned again for 2 extended periods. By her persuasiveness as a narrative historian, by the charm of her style, she opens to readers the history of the Balkans, of the Ottoman Empire, of the medieval Serbian kingdoms, of the Byzantine Empire, about which most of us are not well informed, myself included, because our picture of Europe is generally limited to Western Europe, and our knowledge of the ancient world focused on classical Greece and Rome. The ambiguous title refers in the first part to an event she witnesses in which a black lamb was sacrificed and its blood dabbed on women's foreheads to ensure their fertility. The Grey Falcon refers to the visit by the prophet Elijah in the form of a grey falcon, who speaks to Prince Lazar, the great Serbian military leader, during the Ottoman War. Elijah, or the Grey Falcon, demands of him that he choose between an earthly kingdom and a heavenly kingdom. He chooses the heavenly kingdom, causing his army to be overrun by the Turks. To the Serbs, this was an act of great piety and courage. To West, it was an abomination. There is simply no way that I can do justice to this work in the brief period of time that I have. And I have to remind you that I don't have the intellectual equipment of a historian, and am in no way capable of summarizing the very complex history of that region. Suffice it to say that there has not been a book written about the region that does not take Black Lamb and Grey Falcon into account. I'm going to read a small section of it to give a hint of its flavor. It contains a bit of history, a conversation with a local peasant, and a profound philosophical commentary. West and her husband are driving with their guide, Constantine, a Serb poet. They are driven up a mountain and they pause at a point to allow the engine to cool. She says, "We none of us regretted it, for there were many gentians on the banks beside the road, and below us the woods lay like bonfires of green flame on the mild rolling turf, and further the distant infinity of mountains was blue as wild hyacinths. We sat there so long that a woman we had passed on a lower curve of the road overtook us, halted in her trudging, came up to the car and laid her arm along the frame of the open window, looking round at us all. Her face had once been perfect, but was no longer so, and I was the better for it. "Good morning," she said to Constantine. "Who are you?" "I am Constantine," he said. "I am from Shabbos, and I am a poet." "And who are you?" she asked my husband and me. "They are English," said Constantine. "A very fine people," she said. "Why do you think that?" said Constantine. "Because they are great fighters, and they love nature," she said. "How do you know they are like that?" asked Constantine. She lifted her arm from the window, took a ball of fine white wool and knitting needles from her other hand, and set to work again, as if sensing from his question an indication that the conversation might not be of the first order, and she might as well get on with her material duties. "Oh, everybody knows that," she answered absently. "And you, Constantine, who are you? Are you a native of this place?" "No," she said, "I live here now, but I was born by Durmitor. Durmitor is the great snow mountain with a black lake at its foot on the northern side of Montenegro." "Who brought you here?" asked Constantine. She laughed a little, lifted her ball of wool to her mouth, sucked the thin thread between her lips, and stood rocking herself, her eyebrows arching in misery. "It is a long story. I am 60 now," she said. "Before the war, I was married over there by Durmitor. I had a husband whom I liked very much, and I had 2 children, a son and a daughter. In 1914, my husband was killed by the Austrians, not in battle. They took him out of our house and shot him. My son, my daughter, was a soldier and was killed, and my daughter and I were sent to a camp. There she died. In the camp it was terrible. Many people died. At the end of the war, I came out and I was alone. So I married a man 20 years older than myself. I did not like him as I liked my first husband, but he was very kind to me. And I had 2 children of his, but they both died, as was natural. But he was too old, and I was too old, and also I was weak from the camp. And now my husband is 80, and he has lost his wits, and he is not kind to me anymore. He is angry with everybody. He sits in his house and rages. I cannot do anything right for him. So I have nothing. Are you poor? Asked Constantine. Not at all, she said. My husband's son, by his first wife, is a judge in old Serbia, and he sends me 300 dinars a month to hire a man to work our land. So we want nothing. Oh, that is all right, but the rest is so wrong. Oh, sister, said Constantine, this is very hard. Yes, it's hard, she said. And can we do nothing for you? Asked Constantine. For we feel very friendly towards you. Can we not give you a lift to where you are going? That you cannot do, though you mean so kindly, she said. For I am not going anywhere. I am walking about, trying to understand why all this happened. If I had to live, why should my life have been like this? If I walk about up here, where it's very high and grand, it seems to me I am nearer to understanding it. She put the ball of wool to her forehead and rubbed it backwards and forwards, while her eyes filled with painful speculation. Goodbye, she said, with distracted courtesy as she moved away. Goodbye. It is doubtful whether, walk as she would on these heights, she would arrive at any conclusion that was of value even to herself. She was, however, the answer to my doubts. She took her destiny not as the beasts take it, nor as the plants and trees. She not only suffered it, she examined it. As the sword swept down on her through the darkness, she threw out her hand and caught the blade as it fell, not caring if she cut her fingers, so long as she could question the substance, where it had been forged and who was the wielder. She wanted to understand the secret, the mystery of process. I knew that art and science were the instruments of this designer, and and this was their sole justification. Though in the Western world where I lived, I had seen art debauched to ornament, and science prostituted to the multiplication of gadgets. I knew that they were descended from man's primitive necessities, that the caveman who had to hunt the aurochs drew him on the rock face that he might better understand the aurochs and have fuller fortune in hunting, and was the ancestor of all artists, that the nomad who had to watch the length of the shadows to know where he should move his herd in the summer pasture, to the summer pasture, was the ancestor of all scientists. But I did not know these things thoroughly with my bowels as well as my mind. I knew them now when I saw the desire for understanding move this woman. It might have been far otherwise for her, for she had been confined by her people's past and present to a kind of destiny that might have stunned its victims into an inability to examine it. Nevertheless, she desired neither peace nor gold, but simply knowledge of what her life might mean. When West finished her manuscript in 1941, it was almost 500,000 words long. This was during a time when the paper was severely rationed. Nevertheless, her publishers at Macmillan didn't hesitate. They found the narrative completely compelling, and they recognized immediately the book's greatness. Though plagued by recurring illnesses, Rebecca West was exploring South African mines in her 60s and writing about apartheid. She was also climbing about on Mayan ruins in her 70s in preparation for writing a book about Mexico and Mexican culture. If you have seen the movie Reds, you might have noticed her as one of the many real-life commentators that Warren Beatty had interspersed into the movie to remark on the action, a kind of Greek chorus. She was made a Dame Commander of the British Empire in 1959. She died at the age of 90 in 1983. Thank you very much. Does anybody have any questions?
Fred, could you comment on the biographies of her, written about her?
Oh, well, the one by Faye Weldon is very short, and it's, but the one by, what is her name?
Victoria Glendinning
is extremely well written, very thorough, and it's really a great book. Tells you all you want to know about her. But Faye Weldon is good. Is a good writer. She used to write the scripts for Upstairs, Downstairs, and she wrote this very, very short book about Rebecca West. Does anyone else have? Yes, Lily.
How difficult was it for you to choose the excerpt?
It was almost impossible. I can't tell you how many hours I poured over this. I mean, I have a confession. I read the book about 30 years ago. I have not reread it, although I've dipped into it from time to time. And the dipping into it, I narrowed it down to so many pieces. I thought this was the most moving. Anybody else? Yes, John.
You said 1,400 pages or something like that?
Yeah, 1,200 pages. Yeah.
So I assume that was highly unusual in that time.
Well, they were rationing paper. It was the very beginning of the war, and they weren't using paper for non-essentials. You often couldn't get books published because they required too much paper. But in that case, it was such a good book and such an important book that they didn't hesitate.
But even forgetting the restrictions on paper,
Yeah.
it's unusual for a book to be this long, no?
Oh yes.
Yeah. So
I mean, the one I could
I
think
guess
of is
my question would be, how widely was this book ever read?
Well, once you start reading it, you can't stop.
Put it down.
Somebody here, you read the book only a couple of years ago, man. You couldn't put it down. Yeah. It's stunning.
I would imagine Richard Holbrook read that book.
I'm sorry?
I would imagine Richard Holbrook read that
Oh,
book.
I'm sure he did, yes. I'm sure he did. But, if you want to do exercises in the morning, you can do it. lift that book 20 times. Anyone else? Yes.
You know which authors she admired?
Which author she admired? Oh gosh. I don't know. I know that she thought Malice was a very good writer, especially stormy relations. And she knew Virginia Woolf and admired Virginia Woolf. I don't know. St. Augustine, she didn't admire him, but he changed her life. It's hard to say. I can't name, I could name the books that changed my life. But you would want to listen to me.
So, Fred, how did her son's life play out? I mean, other than
How did what?
her son's life sort of play out?
He did all right. He was, Wells's wife did not want anything to do with him. And he earned a good living writing in the New Yorker.
Really?
And, yeah. And he was a good writer. I mean, his biography of his father was adulatory. It was, almost like worshiping God. And clearly he hated his mother. And undeservedly, because she really raised him and devoted her life to him while she was trying to write. And there are pictures in the biography of Glendinning of her cavorting with her son in the war. And she did the things that her mother does with a child, but she didn't have as much time as she might have wanted. And she wasn't a very maternal person anyway. So, we start on this. You asked me how he turned out.
Yeah.
Yeah. He turned out okay, except for everybody's bitter.
Did he have children?
I don't know. They were very poor examples.
How about the last years of her life? She was pretty relatively old.
She was old. She was grossly overweight. She sold her house after her husband died. She sold their house in Buckinghamshire, and she bought a lavish apartment in London, and had a lively social life. I mean, she had the Beatles and all the figures of literature and the stage. But she was a fascinating woman. Someone asked me about if I could have lunch with her. Of all the women that I've written about, how many would I like to have lunch with them? I can think I'd like to have lunch with all of them except Rebecca West because she's so scary. Anyone else? Yes.
First of all, favorite among her nonfiction?
Well, yes, it has to be fine. It's her greatest book, and among her fiction, I didn't care that much for her semi-autobiographical books, but I liked The Birds Fall Down, which is about Russia, full of color. Yes, something like that. So, yes, it's a wonderful, very slow, leisurely. It was a leisurely time. Certain classes. Anyone else? Well, thank you all very much. And to each now, I'll be talking about Patrick D. Fermor, who was an English travel writer and quite a figure. He was expelled from school because he was so wild and unmanageable. And he was actually kicked out of his last school for holding hands with the greengrocer's daughter. How times have changed. And he decided course, the obvious thing to do was walk across Europe. And he got a backpack and took Oxford Book of English Verse and the Odes of Horace and started walking. And wrote two wonderful, wonderful books. One is called The Time of Gifts, and the other is Between the Woods and the Water. And he was a war hero. He kidnapped the German commandant from the island of Crete, and was a hero in Greece and in Great Britain. Well, he did this long before he started as a writer. So I hope you come to that.
We have flyers for this on the table. I noticed also some of you didn't have the opportunity to take the list of works by and about Rebecca West that's sitting on the table up there. So make sure you have the shelves. And I do hope we'll see you in a couple of weeks. It's actually October 8th, so it's actually 2 weeks from today.
He is really something. And
I read the first of those books. What a remarkable trip. And not only that, everywhere he went, he was set up, he had introductions, he became
well, he started out, I don't want to give the whole show, but he started out sleeping in barns and on hayricks, and he had a letter of introduction to somebody, and turns out it was a palace, and he stayed. and this happened, and the owner of this house wrote letters of introduction for him all across Europe. So he went from manor house to manor house, when he wasn't sleeping in the street. But he was really remarkable and endlessly charming. Everyone loved him. Someone said it's too bad that I can't put Patty in pill form, so we can take one whenever we feel down. Anyway, I hope you come to that.
Yeah, I hope you'll do this next one as well. But I know that we all probably share the feeling of immense gratitude, Fred, for all of the really somewhat lesser known people, many of them women, who you've introduced us to. It's really remarkable.
I just want to add one thing. That there is a wonderful book by Rebecca West called The Train of Powder. She writes about the Nuremberg trials.
Say it again, I'm sorry, the what of powder?
Train of
Powder.
Yeah. Powder.
She wrote for the New Yorker. Actually, she wrote about the Nuremberg trials for the New Yorker.
Did she write something called Cyclamen?
Yes, it's one of the chapters in that book. Yeah.
One of the chapters in the Yugoslavia book?
No, the chapters Cyclamen and something, greenhouse and something.
Yeah, right, exactly. Just sort of. So, Fred, are you giving up on women, or are you coming back to them?
No, I'm never giving up on women. I'm just giving up on writing about them. Someone asked me, when I started giving these, I gave a talk about 3 men, 4 men. And someone asked me, aren't there any women writers who like you? So I said, okay, And then I did this series of about 14 talks with women. And I invited someone, and she said to me, I noticed you only write about women. Anyway, I'm glad you all came. I hope you enjoyed it. And,
Thank you for coming.